democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The election is less than a week away. The battle is on for voting rights. Early voters across the country are reporting long lines and problems with electronic voting machines, including vote flipping. Republicans, meanwhile, continue to file lawsuits that could stop thousands from voting because their registration information does not exactly match government databases. Legal rulings in Wisconsin, Nevada, and Ohio have rejected these challenges, and the U.S. Supreme Court also dismissed a case earlier this month relating to 200,000 new voters in the battleground state of Ohio. But last week, the White House got involved and asked the Department of Justice to investigate the integrity of these 200,000 new voter registration forms. Ohio Democratic leaders, as well as the ACLU, have sent letters to the Attorney General, Michael Mukasey, urging him not to intervene in the election dispute in Ohio. Meanwhile, in Colorado, more than 11,000 voters in Denver have not received absentee ballots because of a mistake made by the company Sequoia Voting Systems. Sequoia was supposed to have delivered 21,000 ballots to a Denver mail processing facility on October 16th, but the company only delivered about half the requested ballots. I'm joined now by two guests who've been the watchdogs for voting rights. Harvey Wasserman is senior editor of the Ohio-based freepress.org, and he's co-author of 4 books on voter rights: What Happened in Ohio, a documentary record of theft and fraud in the 2004 election, and How the GOP Stole America's 2004 election and is rigging 2008 are among them. He joins me from Columbus, Ohio. We're also joined via video stream from Los Angeles by independent journalist Brad Friedman. He's the creator of the Brad blog at bradblog.com and has reported extensively on vote rigging. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Harvey Wasserman, let's begin with you. Talk about the latest around this issue of the 200,000 new voters, new voter registration forms.
Well, the GOP is trying to disenfranchise these 200,000 people by challenging their right to vote, asking the Secretary of State here, Jennifer Brunner, to let the counties investigate and knock off the voter rolls if they choose to. People who have minor discrepancies in their Social Security numbers or driver's license numbers. And the Secretary of State has rightfully showed that many of these mistakes come from typographical errors when the numbers are entered in at the agencies. And so essentially what the GOP is doing is asking to disenfranchise people because of a minor typographical error. We are supporting the Secretary of State in resisting this attempt. The U.S. Supreme Court has rejected this challenge to these 200,000 voters, but now the Bush administration has ordered or has asked the Attorney General, Mukasey, to get involved. This is reminiscent of the interjection in the 2006 election when 9 federal prosecutors were asked to get involved in alleged voter fraud, which turned out to be non-existent.
Can you explain further what is happening around the White House urging Mukasey to get involved, the ACLU saying he shouldn't get involved, and go back a little in time to, well, really why his predecessor, why the former Attorney General, Gonzales, actually was forced out of office, resigned?
Yes, Attorney General Gonzales was forced out of office because he ordered 9 federal prosecutors, 9 federal employees to prosecute voter fraud that didn't exist. The idea was on the part of the Bush administration to disenfranchise as many people as possible by federal means in the 2006 election. And essentially this is a replay here in Ohio. 200,000 votes exceeds substantially Bush's alleged margin of victory in 2004. It's a lot of votes out of 5.4 million that voted in 2004. So this is a very substantial attack on the ability. This is all about new voters, by the way, who have filed new forms, and it's a very strong attempt to discourage new voters from coming into the place of voting and to affect the election. 200,000 votes thrown off the voter rolls here would be a very substantial chunk and could actually affect the outcome of the election.
There was another very important ruling that Bill O'Reilly of Fox was extremely upset about, and it's the ruling by a federal judge that counties must allow homeless voters to list park benches and other locations that aren't buildings as addresses.
Yeah, well, these people are still citizens. Many of them, in fact, are veterans, and it's quite ironic that the great patriot Bill O'Reilly would want to disenfranchise veterans. We are seeing this up and down the line here in Ohio. We had a sheriff in Greene County attempt to disenfranchise students, or at least make a move toward it. You know, there's always a question whether a student votes at home or on campus, and in Greene County there are a number of colleges, and the sheriff there threatened 308 voters with prosecution based on where they registered to vote. That he was forced to back off of that, and we are having a pretty good counterattack by voting rights advocates in this state, unlike 2004, where the election was essentially stolen without people fighting for it. This time around, I think people are standing up, and it's going to be, we hope, a very different outcome.
Talk about the Secretary of State, Jennifer Brunner, who's been challenged time and time again. Also, aren't there a series of ads that the Republicans have begun running many times a day around the issue of voter fraud?
Well, this is a total red herring. The Cincinnati Enquirer, a conservative Republican paper in Cincinnati, has investigated prosecutions for voter fraud since the 1950s and found less than 10, a bare handful. It's really a false issue. It is a felony to vote fraudulently, and people just don't do it. I think the New York Times has run a statistic of something like 18 successful prosecutions of voting fraud throughout the voter fraud throughout the United States in the last 4 or 5 years. So it's really a non-existent problem, but the Republicans have seized upon it in an attempt to essentially delegitimize this election and to discourage people from voting. We've seen the whole flap with Acorn and other instances where the Republicans are charging that there are massive hordes of people coming in to vote fraudulently. This is just not happening. But we see a concerted campaign here in Ohio by the Republicans to delegitimize the Democratic Secretary of State, Jennifer Brunner, who we feel has been relatively even-handed. She is not like J. Kenneth Blackwell was in 2004, the co-chair. Blackwell then was the co-chair of the Bush-Cheney campaign running the election. This year, Jennifer Brunner is not the co-chair of the Obama campaign, and we feel she's had a pretty good even-handed impact on the election. In fact, she attempted here to provide paper ballots for all who wanted them, who came to the polls and did not want to vote on electronic voting machines. And the Republicans who control the legislature and the purse strings screamed that this would cost too much money and have not allowed that to happen.
Harvey, you have written 4 books on the subject of the elections and votes being stolen. What do you expect in these next? I mean, the election is, well, within a week, less than a week away.
Well, we expect a mix. We think it's going to be much, much better than it was in 2004. A study in 2004 showed it took black voters in the state nearly an hour to vote, as opposed to white voters getting in 15 minutes or less. We don't expect that to be rerun. We do expect some problems. We know in 2004 there was a selective shortchanging of black precincts on voting machines. We don't expect that to happen again. We will have thousands of observers at the polls, and we are urging everyone who's interested to come out and be an election observer, come to the polls with a camera, and make sure that if people are coming out of the polls with complaints, that they are recorded, and we will have hearings after the election to swear people in with affidavits so that can be used in court cases. In general, that their testimony can. We generally expect a much smoother process this year, we hope, but we are still subject to electronic voting machines. As many as half of the people who vote at the polls on Election Day may be voting on electronic voting machines. We're always seeing vote flipping from electronic voting machines in other states, as we saw in Ohio and Youngstown and Columbus in 2004. In both cases, people pushed John Kerry and George Bush lit up. Now we're seeing people pushing Barack Obama and John McCain lighting up. We hope that that doesn't happen again. And we're going to have to fight that, because it's very difficult to correct that on Election Day.
We're going to break, and when we come back, Harvey Wasserman will stay with us, and we'll be joined by Brad Friedman of Brad Blog. We'll find out about the sequoia of voting in Colorado. Stay with us.
is coming. So cast your vote.